You're listening to the Be So Good podcast with Colin Pierce. Colin says you are 10 times better than you think. So why not be so good they can't ignore you? Here he is, Colin Pierce.
This will end up being one of my favourite podcasts, and I hope yours too. I'm interviewing my very good friend, Bob Beaumont, Chairman, CEO of Beaumont Tiles. And to hear all about it, let's welcome Bob Beaumont. Hello, Bob. I'm glad you joined us.
I am too. It's great to see you.
Now, I want to begin by talking about your history very briefly, because we don't want to go into too much detail, but you've been with Beaumont Tiles all your working life.
I have nearly 53 years.
So you joined straight after school?
I did.
As a what?
As a what? No, I joined as a storeman. And yes, I actually, it's a funny story. I was going to be an engineer. And I had a cadetship all lined up, ready to go to university to be an engineer, an aeronautical engineer. And
hence the interest in model planes.
Correct. I've always been fascinated by aeroplanes. So that fell through at the last minute. And I thought, oh, I don't have plan B. There was only ever plan A. So I went to my dad, who had this tiny little business with a half a dozen people, and said, hey, Dad, do you mind if I come and work in the store for a while I get my head together and see what I want to do? And I never got around to leaving. So you see, that's
about that.
It all happens by accidents.
Well, I think it's an amusing anecdote that one of your jobs was to hop on your bike and deliver the punch cards for the first ever IBM computer in Adelaide.
Well, it wasn't the first in Adelaide, but it was, yes, a very early computer back in very early 70s. This tiny little company invested in its own computer, which is about like us investing in a private jet these days.
I see. It was very go ahead, but it couldn't do its own calculations on the spot. You had to take the punch card somewhere else.
That was actually an earlier version with the punch cards. That was an NCR, and we had a punch card generator at the office, and we would generate all the punch cards. In fact, it was an optical font generator more than font punch card, so it was an advanced thing. And so I'd take the spool down to NCR, and they'd produce our statements, which is great. But then some great salesman came along and sold us an IBM computer, which was as big as a very large desk. And it was a 32K computer.
Wow. Yes, I've got one 10 times that size, 100 times that size. So when you worked with your dad for a long time, he owned the business, he'd started it, a serial entrepreneur, you've often called him, a wonderful man into the bargain, lived well into his 90s, didn't he?
Mm.
And everybody loved him and referred to him as Mr. RJ.
That's right, yes. It was, people seem to just innately want to honour him in some way.
Well, yes, I met him and he was lovely. When did you convince him that you should be the boss?
Well, I didn't really. We sort of just cruised through things. We didn't do anything that formally, although when I was 28 in 1978, which tells you how old I am, then he said, why don't you be general manager? I said, fine. And nothing much changed because I was doing the role anyway. And so he started to reduce his working hours towards the end of the 80s. And during the 90s, would come in 3 days a week from about 10 till 3 and finished up at the end of the 90s, really.
Fantastic.
But he was still on the board.
Right. Now you have, you're the youngest of 4 brothers. Are they in the business?
No, they already had their careers well in train by the time the business started to kick off. And so I was the only one around, and I only got into it by accident. So it was really up to me to move things along. And in fact, I didn't have any great aspirations to be in business or to sell tiles or to grow the business. It just sort of happened.
Yes, that's a bit of a fib. It didn't really happen. You're quite the strategist, I know. We'll talk about that in a moment. Just one more brief question, and that's before we get into what makes a successful business. But the question would have to be, when you decided to move from little Beaumont Tiles and 200 Grrater Street. Boy, you had made that famous too, hadn't you? You decided that every television commercial would feature a Beaumont Tiles 200 Grrater Street commercial.
That was interesting. And we didn't really set out to dominate the airwaves in the slightest. We couldn't afford to. And so Channel 10 brought in a package of 5 ads on a Saturday night, which was a very poor night for TV because everybody wanted to go out. And so they were really cheap, so we bought them, and it went from there. And we happened to hit on, the TV advertisement writer hit on just the right thing.
200 Grrater Street.
As they do some, yeah.
Yes, fantastic. We'll come to that, as they do sometimes. There's a little wink in that one. You're not that fond of advertising copywriters, marketers, are you? Now, don't answer at length because we could get sued.
No, I have a great deal of respect for a number of them that I have met. We have a relationship with a guy by the name of Brenton Whittle, who's an outstanding guy, absolutely yes. Outstanding. So, I have met a number of them who I really respect a great deal and like.
Very good. Very carefully answered. When did you move from 200 Grrater Street, suburban stores, and then finally to franchisees? Now, that started with 6, and you've now got approximately, with warehouse people, head office people, franchisees and franchise employees, how many people now?
Bit hard to say with COVID going on, but over 700.
Whew. That is some growth. So why suburban, and then why franchising?
Well, we thought we needed some suburban shops in addition to Grrater Street. And so we had the opportunity to start one, then another one came along at the same time. So we started 2, and as you do. And so we sort of grew from there, and we were 200 Grrater Street and discount tile warehouses just about everywhere. And so we pushed on with that, but then we started to sell wholesale into the country areas. And one day, one of the franchisees, and this is deep and meaningful market research and strategy, Colin, you've got to understand this. One of the wholesale customers came to me and said, "Hey, Bob, you've got a good name. Can we use your name on our building?" And I said, "Oh, yeah." So that was franchising.
That was one of those unplanned moments, wasn't it?
Yeah. So, but we started to do franchising a little bit, and it was very, very unsophisticated in those days. Basically, there were no sophisticated franchises, and so we gradually grew that through the 90s and the early noughties until about 2004. I said, "Okay, this has just evolved. We now have to reinvent it, and as something that we actually want." So that's what we did.
Wow. And so over 100 franchises now, 100 franchisees, 120 nearly?
Well, we've got nearly 120 outlets, but about 90 franchises.
Fantastic. Well, you're in the right place and you're the right man to ask, what do you need for a successful business?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I guess there's been many books written about that, but there's not that many things I think that you actually need to be a successful business. The first thing you need, I think, is a good strategy. And I really think strategy and planning is a very, very important thing, even though some of the things that we've done have not been planned, we've fallen into them. And I guess that happens all the time in business. But, Around the world, there must be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of ideas sitting in patent offices. And they're just sitting there doing nothing. And people think that if they come up with an idea, that's the most important thing. It's not the most important thing. The most important thing is the implementation of that idea. You've got to have a good strategy, how to take it to market. I think one of the classic examples of that that I ever heard of was the old VHS versus beta argument way back, and most of the audience wouldn't even remember this, when videotape first came out. There were two types of videotape. One was the beta version and one was VHS. Beta was much better than VHS, but guess which won the marketing prize? It was VHS.
Yes.
And beta basically died and became just a professional thing, while VHS took over the market. That's because they took it to market better. It wasn't that it was a better product. It wasn't that it was a better idea. And I think too many people talk about entrepreneurs and how, you know, we've got to get these ideas and make the best of them, and startups and all that sort of thing. It's rubbish, really, because unless you implement it, the best idea in the world won't fly.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, that's really important. And
Can we go back and say you need a good strategy? Yours has evolved, but you've finally nailed it down, and it's kind of now in a book and everybody can refer to it, as it were. So is that okay, that it kind of just move along with the times and the tide? But sometime you've got to settle down. Now, what was the strategy? What's the strategy going to be? Would that be right?
Yeah, you do. You've got to really recognise what the strategy is. You've got to write it down. You've got to understand. People have got to understand where we are going.
All right.
But then you've got to be really flexible, because opportunities can come out of left field. Problems can come out of right field. And your strategy is a fairly fixed thing, and it doesn't consider the unexpected.
Yeah.
And very often you can make the unexpected into something which is tremendously opportune. For example, the best business decision I think I ever made was in 1999, when we heard that the owners of Southport Ceramics wanted to sell. This was Boral, and they had bought this other business, and Southport Ceramics just didn't fit with their business model, and so they wanted to get rid of it. We went out and did something revolutionary for us, which was we sold 25% of the business, and we raised enough capital to buy Southport Ceramics, and that became Beaumont Tiles Queensland, and it was a bit like a minnow swallowing a whale. But it was a great decision. We made good money out of it, and we were able to buy those shares back within a few years. So it was a great decision. And I think that's one of those opportunistic things which was not in the strategy, but we grabbed it.
Yes, and it matched the strategy one way or another. You often quote Walt Disney about getting on with the job, don't you?
Yes. I think that's good. If you want to get something done, stop talking, start doing. And I think it's strategy can easily be put into the category of talking. You can discuss and discuss and discuss and discuss, but until you do something, then nothing happens. It's a bit like the old saying about selling. Until somebody sells something, nothing happens.
Yep. And we sort of both have grown up on that over the last 30, 40 years.
We have.
Tell us about a great philosophy, and maybe where ethics comes into the philosophy of business.
I think you've got to have a philosophy. I did a course or weekend seminar with a guy by the name of Jim Rowan back in the 70s, and he really I guess, affected my philosophy, my whole way of doing business dramatically. And if anybody wants to get a really good grounding in very wise business, get hold of the audio file of his weekend seminar. You can still buy it online. And it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And so I think he also introduced the concept of setting goals. And since that seminar, I've been a great goal setter.
Yes, you pretty well live on your goal book. I noticed that you like to take time out and a considerable amount of time during the year, or the end of the year, isn't it, to set your goals?
Yeah, the first week in the new year, you take a fair bit of time and do some beach walking, and you have a lot of thinking. And I'm a great believer in thinking on paper, or in fact these days thinking on screens. And mind maps are wonderful. Love mind maps. And you review your strategy and you recast your strategy if necessary.
We'll put a link in the notes about Bob's favourite mind map app. Tell me, and it's a website, isn't it? Tell me about the importance of ethics, relationships, what you call fundamentals as well.
Look, I think it's very important, for me, it's very important to have very, very strong ethics in business. Because if people know they can trust you, they'll do business with you. They might go somewhere else and start buying cheaper, but at the end of the day, they'll probably come back eventually and say, okay, I've tried that. Yes, I saved a bit of money, but in the end, I got my fingers burned. I'll come back.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think to have consistency of ethics is important. But ethics is different for different people.
Yes.
So I think that's where consistency comes in, that
Yes.
people know how you're going to react. Some people will have a philosophy of being really tough. Other people will have a philosophy of talking a lot and talking things through. Other people will have a philosophy of rapid decisions. That's fine. All of those are quite valid, but they've got to be consistent.
And that was certainly true of your father. I know that, and he modelled that for you, and you picked that up and then added as a strength of your own, the importance of relationships. How many people have I met at Beaumont Tiles have been there longer than you? I think they're dead now, but there were a few years ago, there were people that had 40, 28, 37 years service.
Yeah, there's still a lot of people around who have had a lot of years in Beaumont Tiles. People tend to stick around. And we also have the Two Timers Club, which I think is a great vote of confidence, where people leave, they think, oh, I forgot what it was like out here, and they ring up and say, can I come back?
Like one or two of our other interviewees on the podcast, I've referred to you as a man with a great head for money. There's this big slot right down the top. The importance of making money is very fundamental. I remember years and years ago, you said something, you had a little formula. You've got to know your cash flow this week, a month in advance, or 6 months, or something like that. Can you remind me of that, and then go on to talk about how you refer to that in your franchisees' lives?
We've been through quite a number of financial crises, as many businesses have over a long period. And I think the most important thing is to be able to fairly accurately forecast in advance your cash flow. If you can forecast fairly accurately what your cash position is going to be, let's say 6 months in advance, and that's not that hard to do. You just need a very competent financial person to help you do it. You can predict a financial crisis in advance and then head it off. You can take action early. You can reduce your stock. You can make arrangements with the bank for greater credit before you actually need it, because one of my strong philosophies with dealing with banks is you always arrange credit when you don't need it.
Yes.
Because they won't want to be interested when you do need it. Somebody once said to me that a bank will give you an umbrella when the sun's shining and then take it away when it's raining. And it's
Great
true,
advice, really.
but they're only looking after their own. It's not that they're nasty people, it's just they've just got to look after their own interests first, because of course they've got shareholders too.
Yeah.
So they've got to protect their interests. So you arrange your funding well in advance when you don't actually need it. But funding, adequate funding, is probably the make or break of just about any business. Most businesses I've seen that have got into trouble not because of people, not because of other problems, but because they ran out of money. You can have very profitable business and still go broke because you run out of money. You can have a business making a loss for several years, but still in existence because they know how to manage their cash.
Mm. One of the bugbears you have about franchisees is as soon as they get into business for themselves, after having been a tiler or a painter or a bank clerk, they go and buy themselves a Mercedes or a magnificent four-wheel drive Ferrari.
Yeah.
What's your car?
Yeah, I have a Land Rover.
And the other one?
A Jaguar.
The one with the big, noisy exhaust pipes. I know. Well,
Yes.
it's no secret. Bob loves planes and cars. So what do you tell your franchisees who just want to go and have a big old spend?
Well, we tell them not to, and we sit down with them and try to work through their cash flow. Unfortunately, they don't usually tell us before they go out and buy something expensive. They'll do it behind our backs. We had one fairly recently who went out and bought a hotel, and they got themselves into trouble, and they were quite distressed that we wouldn't support them. And
it's a hotel got to do with owning a tile business.
That's right. My point exactly. So anyway, they eventually saw that they had made an error in doing that, and they got out of that. So that was good. But we had another one up in Queensland a number of years ago who went and bought a big house, or built a big house, and bought a nice car, and he was doing really well. But then when he became distracted by other things, his sales went down, his profits went down, he couldn't maintain his payments, and in the end we had to buy it back and sell it to one of our other franchisees who's brilliant, and it's powering ahead.
Great. Okay. So be very careful about that. Can we move on to talking about people some more, because you have quite a philosophy about the making of a successful business depends a lot on great people. And some business owners say, where do you get good people? They're as rare as rocking horse manure. What's your philosophy about that, getting them to start with?
Well, it's actually quite hard to find good people. But, a lot of people are really good, but you just got to dig a bit. You just got to inspire them a bit. So not everybody will come through the door burning and full of enthusiasm and confidence and knowledge and contacts. You don't get those sort of people very often. But what you do get is those people who come through the door and they just need a bit of teaching, a bit of coaching, a bit of encouragement, and above all, inspiration. So they feel they're part of a team, part of something special. And it's surprising, those are the people who you rely on. They're the great ones.
They're the people that you and the business has attracted. They're some of those lifers and those two-timers.
Yeah. Well, to tell you about one of our people, well, he wouldn't mind me mentioning his name, Dean Booker. He's our national buyer. We pay him to fly around the world a few times each year and spend millions of dollars.
He hates that. He told me.
Oh, yeah, shocking.
He wished he could just stay home and sit under a tree.
Yeah, so, but he started off as a storeman. And he was gradually given more and more opportunities, and he is outstanding, wonderful guy. But he started off as a storeman. Bill Hughes was our operations manager for years.
Yes.
You'd remember Bill.
I do.
Bill started as a storeman.
Go on.
I started as a storeman.
Well, before I was married, I spent 4 weeks working for Bennett and Fisher in the wool stores. So I was a genuine. Did you have a ticket? Because I was a card carrying storeman packer.
No,
you remember?
I didn't carry a ticket. No. We had some severe disagreements with the Storemen and Packers Union over a period, but we won.
Right. Well, I won. I quit. Go on. You were saying
Yes.
Good people, retaining them.
Retaining good people. It's a matter of giving them something to believe in, and a genuineness where they know that you have their interests at heart as well as your own.
Yeah.
They expect you to have your own interests at heart, but they don't necessarily expect you to have their interests at heart. And many people will join with a real sense of suspicion because they've been burned by some people. We've got one guy who's been there now probably 15, 17 years. When he joined, he was so suspicious.
Golly.
He just could not, bring himself to trust anybody. But now, not a problem.
We can't go into this now, but that's one of the challenges. Once your name goes on somebody else's building and you put your trust in a franchise owner, and then he has people off the street who've never heard of you, RJ, your family, your brothers, the culture, the Bill Hughes, the whole thing, getting that passed down to them is a bit of a trick. So you've got to inspire and motivate them, don't you?
It's extremely difficult because their values may be quite different. Their philosophy almost certainly will be different. Dealing with franchises is a challenge.
Yeah. Did you know it was going to be so hard, or did you just think this would be better than backing into a prickle bush? I'll do it.
Look, we did know that it would be difficult with some people. Look, some of the franchises are just fabulous, absolutely fabulous. And they have their own interests at heart, but also that of the group. They are absolutely outstanding people.
Yeah.
But it's those handful that inevitably complain that make it hard for everyone.
Yes. And that needs a bit of a tough skin. Look, can we move on? And thank you for that. Thank you for your frankness and openness. I'm sure every business owner or wannabe business owner or would-be business owner is taking stock of all these clever and wise remarks. Good funding, we touched on briefly about being friendly with your bank and so on. Do you want to talk just a little bit as we close this about money again?
Look, I think talking franchises and philosophy, I think it's very important to have a philosophy in franchising that the franchisee must make money first. The franchisor very soon afterwards, but the franchisee must make money first. And I think one of the big mistakes made by franchisors is that they are looking after their own pocket and they have no consideration at all for the franchisee's pocket. And if your franchisees don't make money, you won't have a franchise group very long. So we've got to look after our franchisees to make sure they are making money where at all possible. Now, sometimes it's just, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink. And you can tell them blue in the face how to do it, and if they won't do it, then you just can't achieve what you set out to do. But that doesn't affect the philosophy. The philosophy overall generally is you've got to try to make the franchisee make money first.
I'm looking forward to talking to you again because I'd like to speak to you again some more about goals and Jim Rohn and the effect he had on you, how you set your goals, what you think about them. And then I'd also like to talk to you about your philosophy in sales because you've contributed a lot of helpful advice to me and we've chewed over these ideas for many, many years. So thank you for speaking with us today. I really appreciate your being here. Thank you, Bob.
Great pleasure.
You've been listening to Be So Good with Colin Pierce. For more episodes, check the playlist at colinpierce.com/podcast. And don't forget to drop a review in the iTunes listing.